Hey guys, Jay, welcome back to the channel. So guys, I've been hearing a lot about how people are having difficulty finding jobs and losing a job, and really that's tough. Um, I've I've had a whole bunch of situations where I've actually had to leave jobs, and I actually have been laid off a couple of times, and in some cases I've had to quit. There's situations like that too. And I know that it can be tough. Losing your livelihood, and really wondering what you're going to be doing next. So I guess I'll share a little bit of my own background. I'm a graphic designer by trade. I graduated from a design school and quickly moved into uh, advertising with the new home industry here in Toronto. I I did my first job was pretty much doing layout and design. Well, actually, no, more like I was doing designs for my creative director, and yeah, I was just a design monkey. I'm not gonna lie. It was not a great job, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot. It was almost like an apprenticeship, but it was like a learning on the job kind of situation. So it was good. It was good for me. I learned a lot. My first couple of years working for this environment, it was tough. It was a fast paced environment with a lot of different changing things that happened in the new home industry around that time. And housing in general is pretty crazy. For anybody who's in that situation now, you'll know just how difficult it is to keep up with new subdivisions, new homes. The whole idea of selling a home and buying a home, it can be very daunting, very scary. So yeah, I learned very quickly, literally right out of college. I was doing that as a junior for quite a long time. I was actually there for about 2.5 years. I had a great creative director at the time. He was a really good mentor to me, and he taught me everything. And we came from the same school, which was a lot of fun. Like we could talk about the different teachers that were shared and how things were different from when I was going to school and when he was going to school. It was actually really cool. About a year and a half, sorry, about around the 2.5 year mark when I was there, he had a falling out with the owners. He felt that he was being overworked, that he didn't have time to spend with his family anymore. He was working weekends and evenings, and so was I. I was working whenever I could. But you know what? For me, it was a different situation. I was eager to learn. I was young. I didn't know much, so I wanted to just I was a sponge. I was like absorbing everything as much as I could. But of course, my CD, my creative director, having gone through that for the better part of, I think he was there for 5 years. He basically, gave an ultimatum to the owner at the time and said, "Hey, if you don't give me some vacation time, I'm walking." And I'm not sure exactly what really went down. Obviously, things went behind closed doors, but they were fighting in the design department openly. I was there. I was listening to a lot of the fighting, and it came down to the point where they were then slamming the doors in the boardroom, and it came down to it where one day they've had, and this was like after months of arguing, I guess. He would just come one day. My CD walked back to his desk, picked up and collected as much as he could, and then proceeded to walk out the door. I didn't know what was going on. Everybody in the department had no idea what happened, and eventually, I didn't see my CD for a week, and the manager of the studio basically was the one who's giving me assignments. And then finally, we had a meeting, and they said, "Yeah, you know what? He's no longer with the company." So you can imagine at that time, I'm a young designer. I have no direction from anybody at this point. We didn't have an art director, so it was just me and some freelancers, and that was it. Like we were just flying by the seat of our pants. So eventually, The owner of the company, he hired a new CD. This guy was from BC. He had a very relaxed attitude compared to my first CD. As a creative director, he had a different style, which I had to get used to. So things changed very, very quickly, and we started butting heads. I mean, he expected things. He ran a different type of ship. You know what I mean? Like that was the way he decided to do it, right? Like, unlike my first CD, my first creative director, who was pretty hands off. He was like, "All right, Jay, here's the assignment. Go and bring it back to me in an hour, right? I need it before the end of the day, whatever, whatever." So I would do it. I would go for a couple of things. I would hand it back to him, and he'd be like, "All right, cool. Let's here's a couple of changes, blah 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 blah." Send me back, and I'd have it done by the end of the day. Whereas this guy, this new creative director, this new CD, he would basically be very aloof. He wouldn't really give me much direction. He would expect me to know already what he was thinking, and that didn't really jive very well. I mean, I can't read minds. I was a young kid. I wasn't. I think he was used to somebody who, um, was already used to the system. Was already a seasoned professional. I think that's what was accustomed to, because he basically would just plop an assignment on my desk and say, "All right, when you're done, come by, see me. Let's and we'll get it all done." I would do my best, and I've just barely started working in the industry, right? I'd hand it back to him. He would mark it all up and not even sit down with me. He'd actually just say, "Okay, go back to your desk. I'll have this back to you in a second." He would mark it all up and plop it back on my desk and say, "All right, I need this by the end of the day." So I would have to pick it up, figure out his notes, which are done in chicken scratch. It was really, really bad. And then he would expect me to have it done by the end of the day. I would try my best to get something out to him, but 9 times out of 10, he was never satisfied with what I gave him, as much as I would try. And I was young. I didn't know to speak up for myself. I didn't know that I should tell him, "Hey, you know what? Maybe you should sit with me and you could teach me something." I didn't realize that. I was scared of losing my job. I was scared that I wasn't performing to his expectations. I was scared that, he would look at that as a weakness. And I realize it now, years later, that it was a form of bullying. That he wanted to find out how far he could push me and use that against me later, and that'll come up a little later. um and this went on for weeks, and new designers were coming in, and they were also and this is something that I think everyone needs to understand. An office is is a place where you are competing with other people. Let's not joke about that. That's true. If a new designer comes in, it doesn't matter who was there before, seniority wise. If you're all juniors, you're all still at the same level. Um, Even though I was there the longest, everybody else still had strengths and weaknesses, and they did things differently. And the way you handle stress is different as well. So I could tell you could tell if you were walking in, you could tell who this new CD favored, and it was this new other designer. He seemed to like his style, and I think he was able to keep up better than I could in terms of his understanding of what this new CD wanted. So he would throw jobs at him more, and he would leave the, let's just say, less desirable work to me, more like a grunt work, right? And there was another young designer. She was new and very very, very green in terms of her overall experience, but he would take it easy on her, and he would teach her new things, and he would sit down with her a lot. As a matter of fact, he would sit down with her longer than he would sit down with me or the other kid. And I would always basically think the worst. At the end of the day, whenever you're in these situations, you start thinking the worst of this. Like, oh, he really likes her. He wants to get together with her. He wants to all these crazy things and go through your head. And that's why he's favoring, giving her props and giving her more assignments. And And you start thinking to yourself, you've been here longer, I've been here longer. Why aren't I, getting more assignments? Um, and then you start thinking about, why things are happening this way. But that's actually beside the point. After about a few months of this, and you could see how the hierarchy was starting to work. Um, we would have these meetings, and with the actual sales team, uh, when they brought down complaints about the quality of the work or how things were being done, this new CD would not ever take any. You know, he would always. There's an old saying: "Shit flows downhill." So he would get shit on, and then the rest of us would get shit on. But it would always start with me, right? Even if I wasn't doing the work that he assigned me, he would start with me and then move on to the other two. And I always thought that was unfair, right? Because I got shit on because I was the most senior, I guess. I should be watching out for the other two. I was like, how's that possible? You're the CD. Why is it that I'm getting the crap? But that's the way he ran his ship, and I get that. I understand that. That's one of the things about being in a corporate environment as well. You really got to understand how to work with people, and I didn't know that as a young person. I always thought it was unfair. I always thought that that he was picking on me. I always thought that, and to a certain degree, he was. To a certain degree, as I said, there was a bit of bullying going on. I also felt that it was unfair that he was giving favoritism to certain people and not me. But at the same time, I wasn't savvy enough. I didn't realize at the time that there's what they call office politics. I didn't realize that you have to be able to play a certain game. And what I mean by that is you have to know when to, flatter somebody in order to take some pressure off of you. That's something that no one can teach you. That's something that you have to learn with experience. But what I can tell you is you have to be patient. You have to be patient. You have to listen, and you have to understand what your boss is trying to tell you. And it sucks because sometimes your boss is actually the one who can't communicate. Sometimes they just have a hard time expressing themselves, or the only way they can express themselves is by yelling at you. That happens a lot. And you know what? Accolades are not much in a corporate environment. You're not going to get a lot of thank yous. You're not going to get a lot of thank yous. You're not going to get a lot of appreciation. It's pretty much here's the work, get it done, and at the end of the day, you hand it in, and it's like, all right. And I think the most you can hope for is good work. That's something they call, and we call it, growing a thick skin, because that actually is what it is. No one's gonna, no one in a corporate environment is gonna say thank you very much. You're doing an amazing job. You're awesome. That's especially when you're a young, a young employee. It's more about what is it that you can do, how fast is it that you can do it, and what is it that you bring to the company. And it's about proving yourself. And it's a hard learning curve. But at the same time, it all comes down to how you communicate with others, how you are able to express yourself and be able to work with everybody around you. Now, when I was first coming up with this job, it was important for me to look good, and present myself well. That way, no one would question. Okay, you're lazy, right? Because how you dress, at least when I was in the workforce, spoke a lot about that. My creative director, my CD, he would come in shorts, flip flops, and like a T neck, just a t-shirt, sorry, t-shirt, and that was okay for him. He's a creative director. He can do whatever he wants. But he would expect everybody else in his department to come with, at minimum, a polo shirt, right? Kind of like this, right? Dress pants and dress shoes. That was what he expected, and we had to follow it. That's how the studio culture was, and that's the other thing about working in an environment, a business environment, you have to understand the culture. It's very important. Um, but then it came down to a head. I felt that I was being treated unfairly, and the other two designers were again a little bit more favored than I was, and I was there. I was the senior one. I was the one who was had the most time there, and I would always get the crap. At least I felt that way. So at one point, um, you know, my CD and his famous line at the time, because he would when he graduated university, his famous line was, "Oh, I have a degree in psychology." So and he felt that he could read everybody and understand everybody's psychological profiling, I guess, you know. So whenever I would come up and I would complain a little bit, or I would try to explain my reasoning for doing something, and he was like, "No, you're wrong." That's what he would always say. He would always say, "No, you're wrong." He wouldn't give me an explanation. He would always say, "No, you're wrong." And I would say, "Well, what do you think of this?" And he's like, "Nope, you're wrong." And he would just like dismiss everything offhand. So that kind of got to me. And when I used to try to fight back, he would say, "Oh, you know what? This is your problem. You know, you're suffering from this." And he would give me this scientific explanation as to why I am the way I am. And I was like, "You don't know me. You don't know who I am. Like how do you know that?" He was like, "Oh, I have a degree. I have a, you know." And that's what he would say. He would always say, "I have a degree in this, and yeah, you need to seek help," or you know, and it would always just like he knew how to push my buttons. He knew how to push my buttons, and I think what he was trying to do is he was trying to really test me and really make me kind of mold me in his image, which to a certain degree I can understand, but at the same time you can only do that so long before somebody decides, you know what, like. And the other thing is, in some ways, I did know a little bit more about how to do things than he did in terms of like how the programs worked, and he did not like that. He did not like it when I showed him up and said, "Hey, you can do this with this program. Maybe it's something you can use." And he would like, "Oh, you know that's a waste of time. Don't ever do that again." He would tell me literally to every time I have a shortcut or something, an easier way of doing things, he would tell me, "Don't ever do that. Right? You do it my way. I want you to do it this way, and don't ever." And I would ignore him, right? I would do it my way because I was quicker, it was easier, it was faster, right? But I would use the standard programs that everybody uses. That's very important. You have to be able to standardize and use the programs that everybody uses. And one day it finally came to a head, though. He was berating me for not getting work done on time. It wasn't done the way he wanted to do it. The methodology that I used was not right. And of course, it was my problem. It was like psychologically, I hadn't, you know, I was breaking down, and you know, again, he would use all these tactics against me, and I basically just told him to. At that point, I was like, "Look, you know, what you're asking me is you know impossible at these deadlines. I've been working here weekends, right, just to catch up with what it is that you want me to do, right? Why don't you show me what it is that you want me to do, and then I'll try to catch up." And he's like, "No, you should learn. You should know this. You're straight out of college. You know more about the computers." And his expectations were too high. And I am going to say this. I am going to say this. There is a point at which things are unfair, and you have to realize when that is. And I realized that what he's doing to me was unfair. So I told him, you know what, this is ridiculous. Um, I need to take a break. And he basically said, look, if you take a break right now, don't bother coming back. When he said that, I already said, I looked at him and like, you know what? And I told him to fuck off. I literally told him to fuck off. I stormed out of there and I basically took off. And I just needed to blow off some steam. By the time I came back, um, I sat back down at my desk. He wasn't talking to me. I wasn't talking to him. And the owners called me into the boardroom. Obviously, they had a discussion. They talked a little bit with the CD, who obviously had a grievance with me, and they basically told me, you know what, Jay, you know, we really appreciate you. We appreciate all the work you've put in over the years, but unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go. I remember looking at the owner and saying, "Didn't you just give me an evaluation a month ago, and you said that my work was exemplary and that you were hoping that I'd stay on for longer?" And he couldn't say anything to that. And I understood. I said, okay, you know what? The CD wants me out. Fine, I'm out. Right? They gave me a severance letter, and here in Canada, you get 2 weeks' pay, and that was it. On hindsight, I could have, you know, filed a grievance with the work board of Ontario, and probably got more money. Um, and I really realized that when I got a call from the owner asking if I was okay. Literally later that evening, I realized that that was something I could have done, but that was all hindsight. Uh, but the problem is that now I didn't have a job, and I was freaking out. I didn't know what to do. You know, I didn't have any debt yet. You know, I was very young. I had a credit card, but I wasn't going through. But at the end of the day, you know, once you lose your job, it's one of those scary situations. So for the first time, uh, I decided I should go freelance. And I'll tell you right now, that's really tough. Not having like I had a lot of experience being a designer for the new home industry, but not much else. You know, I could design logos, I could design billboards, I could design a whole bunch of stuff, and I dabbled in web design, so I had some tools that I could use. But it really wasn't much in terms of experience, so I had to build up some more. So freelance was interesting. I was able to get a few clients, you know, from word of mouth and friends and referrals. And it was an interesting time. I got to work on a whole bunch of different projects, but it was scary, man. It was scary. I didn't know when my next paycheck was coming in, and it really was a stressful situation. It was a stressful time. But as I gained more knowledge in the different disciplines and the different types of things that I was doing, more web design as time went on, I started getting more confident, and I started getting, you know, I started learning how to deal with clients. Um, I wore a lot of suits back then. Okay, suits, not exactly suits, but I wear a nice dress shirt, a tie, dress pants. I didn't have this beard. I was very clean shaven. You know what I mean? I had shorter hair, but that's important when you're meeting clients. Very very important. Dress for success, as they say, right? I think that's very important when you're working for yourself. And speak respectively. You know, respectfully. Sorry, speak respectfully. That was the biggest thing. Understand that the client doesn't always understand what it is that you know versus what it is that they know. In a lot of ways, clients don't understand what they want. I found that to be a big thing. And the more I listened, which is very important, the more I listened, the more I was able to take in and understand what their needs were. And I think that that whole process of going out on my own and learning and working with clients by myself, it helped me in the next phase of my career, which was going to another agency and working directly for the sports industry. And understanding at that point that, you know what, people are particular, but they also want to be respected because they are paying you, right, to do a job. That was huge for me. You know, losing my job actually helped me out a lot because in losing my job, I had to work for myself. And because I was working for myself, I learned how to communicate better with my clients. In turn, I learned how to communicate better with my coworkers in my next job. And I learned how to communicate better with my creative director and all of the people who were above me. And it was easier for me to understand how the politics of a corporate setting worked because of the way I was able to take those, you know, experiences from before. You know, going through adversity, being bullied in a different environment as a junior, and you know, and understanding that there's a hierarchy that's involved in the actual workplace, as well as there are a lot of people who are looking out for you, but there are also going to be a lot of people who are wanting you to fail, and being able to understand those things. So working for myself allowed me to hone those skills of listening, of having respect for the client because they are paying me to do a job, and of course, being able to deliver the job on time. I'm not going to say I was the best at anything, there were times where I would have to ask for extensions on certain projects because I would underestimate my time. I thought I knew, because of the work I had done in my first job, how to estimate for time for design. But I realized there were certain design exercises, like a logo. I pretty much knew how long it would take me, right? But I didn't realize that there would be multiple revisions on that logo. They wouldn't like the first set of logos I would design for them, so they wanted revisions, and then I would get frustrated because we're not able to communicate properly, and that's the key. Like, you really need to understand what they're saying, or if you can't understand what they're saying, ask somebody else why is it they're saying this but they want this, and then somebody else can maybe help you understand what they're trying to say. There was a lot of that went on, but through that learning process, in my next stage of my career, I was surprised that I actually should keep up this time. I had other designers in the studio, but my CD, he was very hard nosed. He was very demanding. But my AD, my art director, so there was a creative director and an art director in this new sports industry. And the creative director, he basically would take a look at everybody's work as a whole through the art director. So the creative director would be the one who actually says, okay, this is what we're doing, and then pass that on to the art director, and the art director would say, okay, J, you need to do this one, P, you need to do this one, and C, you need to do this one, right? So we would all do our little work. We would go back to our AD, the art director, and she would actually check our work, tell us where to fix it, and that was great because I got real feedback around that time, and I really appreciated that. So she would give us feedback, and it was like a buffer between the CD and the AD, and she was great. Honestly, I had a really great experience with my AD versus my CD, and I learned a lot. But I also learned how to deal with the communication by doing it myself, by being a freelancer and learning this on the fly, trying to figure this out on my own. I learned how to communicate better with clients. I learned how to get deadlines in place. I learned how to meet those deadlines on proper, and actually figure out estimates and how I could really figure these out and get the job done as quickly as possible in the time I'd estimated for my clients. And it was very important, as that translated very well into the next stage of my career, where I needed to deal with a client who is actually my creative director and my art director, and I was able to speak with them in the language that they wanted me to speak in, the business language, right? And the way I dressed in this situation was not so harsh. We could come in with a little bit more of a business casual dress. Now, business casual is still probably a polo, right? And some probably jeans, or something a little bit less formal. But you still had to be presentable, right? You probably even wear sneakers. I remember wearing sneakers. But if a client was coming in, they would tell you ahead of time, hey, you should be dressing up a little bit. Bring in some better shoes, bring in some better pants, wear a really nice shirt. That often happened. And it's something you had to adhere to if you want to be part of that corporate culture, being in that situation. I learned a lot during that time. But inevitably, that time came to an end as the business actually got sold and moved down to the United States. So I lost my job again. And again, I only got about 2 weeks severance. But I was a little bit more prepared this time. Um, the first time was very, very scary. The first time I had no idea what to go through. I was going through a lot of anxiety. And for a long time, I was just sitting in my room, just stressing out about it. And if it wasn't until somebody suggested to me you should try freelance and see if you can teach yourself some skills. That was the biggest thing for me. Somebody giving me some advice and really understanding my shortcomings, my weaknesses, and that's, I think, is gonna go. I think everyone's gonna go through that. Everybody's gonna go through that point where they lose their jobs, they have to figure something out, and they learn more along the way with the help of others. So during the period where I had been laid off again because the company had been sold, I was in a better position now. I could actually go freelancing again, but I decided to start a company. and try things on my own a little bit. And that actually worked out better than I thought. I had a lot more clients this time. I was doing a lot more web work. I was doing a lot more jobs which I was stretching my boundaries. I wasn't just doing sports. I was also I wasn't just limiting myself to sports industry. I was doing new home industry. I was doing events, and I was doing so many different clients. People who were doing kitchens, people who were doing furniture, people who were doing clients who were doing so many different things, and I learned a lot along the way. But at the same time, I always kept up a level of professionalism that people were expecting, and that's very important. Understanding how to speak to people in the language that they're expecting is very important. And it goes a long way in terms of like keeping your clients. I went through a number of different jobs and went through several different situations where I lost those jobs. But each time I was able to pick myself up and learn more as I went along. And after such a long time doing that, I am now comfortable going into any situation right now and even interviewing for any number of jobs and really understanding that there's a certain amount of corporate culture that everyone should be prepared for. And I think that that's something that you're not taught in school. I don't think anybody ever teaches you when you're in school that, yeah, when you go to the office, you need to be respectful to your boss, you need to be respectful to your coworkers, and you need to be able to speak in a particular way. Um, you know, don't treat everybody like your friend because they're not. They're your coworkers, they're your peers, they're people who can either help you or hinder you in the workforce. And I think when you start understanding that, it's harder to get fired because you start engaging yourself in the corporate culture. You start understanding other people around you and working better with other people around you. And for me, that was a big deal because when I first entered the workforce, I didn't know those things. And I was nervous and I was struggling and I didn't know how to deal with those things. But after the first time I got fired, the first time I got laid off, I realized through the experiences that I had before that there's a certain way to do things and that I needed to figure that out if I was going to be successful in what I was doing. It's not always going to work out for you, but the more you keep trying, the more you keep doing things, repetition is very important, but actually understanding what your client needs or what your boss needs or what your supervisor needs, and you can understand the language that they're speaking in, will help you out a lot. I think communication is the key. But at the end of the day, I do want to say this: getting fired is not the end of the world. Losing your job is not the end of the world. Being laid off is not the end of the world. There's always opportunities out there that you can bounce back from, that you can learn from. And I think that's the important thing. There's an old saying, and I think everybody says it: your mistakes are your best teachers. And it's true. Whatever mistakes you make, try to learn from them. Because if you don't at least learn from your mistakes and you keep repeating those same mistakes, then it's not working. You have to figure out and learn from your mistakes so that you can figure out how to deal with those same mistakes, those same situations where those mistakes can happen, and you can avoid those mistakes. And of course, as I said, in the situations, think of it like one of the main mistakes that a lot of people make is not understanding how to communicate with the people around you. And once you figure out how they communicate and how they want to be communicated with, then I think you'll be able to figure out how best to not get into situations where you will make those mistakes. And it'll be easier to acclimate into a work environment. And as I said in the beginning, losing your job is not the end of the world. It's just another mistake that you can learn from. Guys, I thought I'd just share this little story with you because, I've lost my job. A lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of people have been fired. A lot of people have, been in situations where these things happen. It's stressful. You oftentimes question yourself and really doubt yourself. But the reality is, if you keep a level head and you learn from what it is that the experience that happened when you were fired, and continue and learn and attribute all the things you learned to the next position, to your next stage of your career, you will become successful. Guys, thanks for watching. I'm gonna do a few more of these, open chats. I think they're helpful, and if you enjoy them, please, consider subscribing. Um, I really want to hear from you guys. What have you ever been in this situation? Are you in this situation now where you've lost your job? Because I'd like to sort of find out more about what other people are going through and how you're dealing with these things. Are you able to communicate with people the way you want to, or is there some sort of like communication barrier? Are you being bullied at your current job? Do you feel that the corporate culture is not for you, and you'd rather go and do something like freelance, or become your own boss, make your own company? I would love to hear what you guys think, and please write those in the comment section below. And of course, if you're interested in this type of content, please consider subscribing. I am going to be doing these a couple of times a week, and I hope to be helpful in some way, and maybe you guys can learn something. All right, guys. I hope you're all doing well, staying safe, and as always, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Good journey. Geek proud, everybody. This thing's too close to me.